release of Southern Palladium's highly anticipated pre-feasibility study for its Bengwenyama PGM project caught the market's attention on Monday, with plenty of buying support over the last week. Factoring in this week's gains, shares in SPD have now doubled since the company announced another impressive mineral resource upgrade at Bengwenyama back in late August. And the PFS numbers tell the story, with a Project NPV of over $1 billion and a Maiden JORC Ore Reserve of 6.29 million ounces at 6.17 grams per tonne PGM. Along with those impressive numbers, Bengwenyama has several other unique attributes, not least of which is its strategic location in South Africa's Bushveld province, the global home of PGM production. That also means a mineralisation structure consistent with the world's major PGM producers, high grades at shallow depths, and a simple mine plan with attractive per unit economics. In light of those results, I'm joined by Bridge Street Capital analyst Chris Baker to break down the numbers. Chris, thanks for joining us. Firstly, in a detailed PFS like this, there are plenty of numbers to run through. So what do you think stood out to investors in the first instance?
Yeah, g'day, Alex. Thanks for the opportunity. Look, I think just standing aside from the numbers for a moment, I think what we've learned and what's been confirmed and the market finally has appreciated that this is genuinely a tier one project. It's a very large 40 million ounces, over 40 million ounces. We've seen that being released recently from two reefs. It's shallow. Very importantly, it's a shallow deposit. Will be underground mineable, but starting to mine from 50 metres, just 50 metres. The average mining depth in South Africa is now probably over 1,000 metres. So this is very shallow. And it's high grade. The grades they're talking about now are over 6 grams. So this is really an unusual deposit. But looking more at the PFS, these are impressive numbers, using what I think are conservative commodity price assumptions, 1,100 palladium, 1,200 platinum, 6,000 odd rhodium. These are conservative numbers. And out of this, having progressed from the scoping study to the pre-fees, we've got more production, 20% up on mill throughput because they've got so much ore they can do that. Cash costs have come down and they've generated an internal rate of return of 28% after tax, and in turn of just over $1 billion NPV at an 8% discount rate. This is impressive stuff. Importantly, the number that we were watching out for was the capital. We're always worried in this high inflation environment that capital might blow out. In fact, the capital cost has come down by 6%. So all around, it really surprised me. These were very, very significant numbers for what will be a tier one project.
Thanks, Chris. Now turning to the broader market for platinum and palladium, and platinum has found another round of support lately, with prices climbing back above $1,000 an ounce. How are you assessing the recent price action as Southern Palladium advances the Bengwenyama project towards mine development?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, commodities go up and down. I remember some bloke saying to me once, asking is gold going up or down? I said, well, it's probably going to do one of those, but not necessarily in that order. And, precious metals are hard to call price-wise. At least with the PGMs, you've got some idea about supply and demand. And what we did see when, palladium got to $2,900, rhodium got to $28,000. It's now back at under 5,000. I mean, this was picnic time for the PGM producers. And surprise, surprise, what did they do? They produced more of it. The supply moved into excess and prices followed. So the industry is in all sorts of pain at the moment. And we've seen a lot of shaft closures in South Africa, the odd mine closure in South Africa, a big mine in Montana, the Stillwater mine that was projecting moving to 650,000 ounces is now talking about going back to 250,000 ounces. That's mainly a palladium producer. So there's a lot of pain, and with that comes lower production levels. So I think that the broad outlook for PGMs is moving back into a balanced market now. And then if you believe some of the experts around, and pretty much singing from the same hymn sheet, that moving into next year, we'll see quite a significant supply deficit, and both metals, palladium, platinum, and probably even rhodium, will move into a net supply deficit. That, of course, has got to be very supportive for metal prices. The cream on the cake occurred, and I think this is what's caused palladium to rally recently. Just literally in the last few days, it's now up about $1,200 an ounce, having been down as low as $900. Surprisingly, quite a lot of Western world palladium comes from Russia. Despite the embargoes on Russian exports, Russia produces about 40% of the world's palladium. And so the car manufacturers, remembering the palladium goes into auto cats to internal combustion engines, a lot of it simply has to come out of Russia. We saw Biden the other day, maybe a bit of an election thing, but starting to thump the table with the G8 saying we've got to stop importing Russian metal. We've got to stop importing Russian palladium in particular. And I think that that's what really gave the metal price a bit of a nudge. If there's no metal coming out of Russia, it'll probably come out through China one way or another. But if supply is constrained, I think that's going to see palladium in particular and platinum and rhodium as well. We'll certainly give them some support, and I think we'll see further price strength from these metals. I think it's quite a positive outlook.
So for Australian investors who aren't familiar with South Africa's Bushveld Complex, can you just tell us why it's called the global home of PGMs?
Yeah, it's an amazing bit of geology. In fact, all of South Africa is an amazing bit of geology. It produces, well, at one point was producing half the world's diamonds and, good proportion of the world's gold and platinum now. Even now, 70% of global platinum supplies come from South Africa. The Bushveld Intrusive Complex, as it's called, is probably one of the largest intrusive bodies on the planet. It's this enormous thing. It extends for hundreds of kilometres. The way I kind of think about it is sort of stacked dinner plates, if you like. So this is a layered intrusive. There are many of them around the world, but this is a particularly large one. And within this, there are a number of different horizons, some of which are just chrome and some of which have got magnetite, but two in particular contain enrichments in the platinum group metals. One of the reefs, and the traditional reef that was kicked off now 100 years ago, I think almost this year, the industry is now 100 years old. It's called the Merensky Reef, and that was developed on what's known as the Western Limb, out to the Western Johannesburg near a town called Rustenburg, and that's provided the bulk of the world's PGMs for decades. Subsequently, we've seen development of what's called the UG2 reef, which is mainly a chromite reef with enrichments in PGMs, and that is being mined on the Western Limb, but increasingly mined on the Eastern Limb as the Western Limb mines became mature. As I mentioned, this is a very mature industry. The average mining depth is getting on for what would be now over 1,000 metres. So virtually all, with one exception, one very large mine on the northern limb, but almost every other mine will be underground. Average depth, as I said, over 1,000 metres, and there are deeper shaft now, as I understand it, is about 2,000 metres. So these are really high-cost operations. So the Bushveld, one of those geological oddities, just happens to have concentrated the bulk of the planet's platinum group metals.
And just finally, Chris, now that the PFS has been released on budget and on schedule, what key milestones will Southern Palladium investors be looking for heading into 2025?
Yeah, just to pick up on that point you made there on budget and on schedule. I mean, how many times does this industry not deliver on budget and not deliver on schedule? I think these guys have done a fantastic job. They raised $19 million 2.5 years ago. Quarterly's just come out and they've got about $4 million left. So they've been able to drive this project from, I think they had about 18 million ounces of inferred to 43 million ounces, fair chunk of which is in measured and indicated, for $15 odd million. I reckon they've done a great job, and they've done it on schedule. I think this is impressive. So looking forward, first and foremost, it's good to see these guys thinking out of the box. We said capital's down, but it's still a big CapEx project, 300 and something odd million US dollars. So, this is a lot to fund. It was really interesting to look at a number of the options they're considering to reduce CapEx. So, perhaps the use of contractors, underground contractors. That's not always used in South Africa. So very commonly used in Australia. So that could be an opportunity. They're looking at perhaps staging the mill from best part of a million and a half tonnes per annum going to 2.4. They're looking at ore sorting as a possible means by which they could keep the plant size down. So as I said, good to see them thinking outside the box. So that work will be done, as I understand it, into the first quarter of next year. Very important for this project is granting of the mining right. The application was put in, I'm guessing, 6 months ago. All going well, I believe, and they're now saying that will be granted first quarter of 2025. So obviously nothing can be done until they've got the mining right on board. As far as I'm aware, everything has gone to plan. The local community is supportive. This is Black economically empowered, so there's no work to be done there. The Bengwenyama community owns 30% of the project, should I say. They own 9% of Southern Palladium. So this is well and truly Black economically empowered, which is great. So no negotiations to happen there. I think they'll then look to do some more drilling, maybe look to optimise the underground further. It's already a pretty good looking mine. Let's see if we can make it better. They'll need some more samples for metallurgy. Metallurgy needs to be looked, the variability needs to be looked at, and then design of the decline. There'll be some more drilling to be done there, I imagine. So again, that will happen in the first half. Completion of the DFS, they haven't specified a date by which they're going to have that done, other than to say it'll be sometime in 2025. So again, I think this PFS work is pretty well advanced. So I think really the real detail I'll have to work on during next year. Then, of course, onto financing, FID, and then into construction, probably 26 or something like that. So a lot of work to be done still, and a lot of really good news flow. Just at this point, touch on management as well. I mean, the company's been run very well by Johan Odendaal. He's a South African geologist and worked in banking for a number of years. He's really pulled this together with the help of consultants Manexcon, and I think it's important that these guys have done a very good and very professional job in pulling this all together. And I think the other important thing to remember is that the feasibility study, the pre-feasibility study, has been vetted by SRK, one of the biggest consulting groups in the world, and they've signed off on this. So, hats off to Johan and his team for pulling this together. The geologists, I have to say, I've met a couple of times, very competent guys with a lot of experience in the PGM sector. And just to highlight, they've just appointed Roger Baxter, the chairman, as executive chairman. So he's come in as an executive role. He was the CEO of the South African Mining Council for many years, 9 years, I think. And he's exceptionally well known in South Africa. So his role will be to advance permitting, making sure that everyone, the government's on side, knows the government extremely well. And also help structure the company, getting ready for financing and pushing the go button. So good team, and I'm sure they'll be building that team now progressively over the next 12 months to get this ready for final FID and go ahead with financing and construction.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate your insights as always. Thanks for joining me.
Cheers, Alex.